Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this fourth session of the introduction to the Quran, the summarized version of the Quran for the month of Ramadan 2024. I described the passage of Surah Al-Baqarah in my yesterday's presentation from verse 142 till verse 260. In today's presentation, we will cover from verse 261 and till the end of Surah Al-Baqarah and do one half of Surah Aal-i-Imraan as well. In Surah Al-Baqarah, we saw that in the second half of the Surah, from verse 163 onwards, the Almighty mentioned the Sharia, the law that He gave to the Muslim Ummah. In particular, those aspects of the law that were needed at the time when the Surah was being revealed. In this description, the sequence that was followed was a logical sequence, starting from the description of Tawheed, the oneness of Allah. The description went on to mention laws regarding sanctity of life and sanctity of wealth, followed by the important expectation of the Almighty for believers to fast during the month of Ramadan so that they have this all-important quality of taqwa, God consciousness in them that would enable them to follow the law, the Sharia. And then there was this description of Hajj that was quite obviously there in the minds of believers for them to do, as well as Umrah from Medina after the direction of prayers was shifted towards the Kaaba. However, because it was not possible without overcoming the resistance of the disbelievers of Mecca, there was this mention of jihad, and this jihad then necessitated that wealth should be spent or resources to be collected for the purpose of jihad. So infaq, spending in the way of God, was also talked about. And then we saw that there was this mention of the law of nikah, because in the case of jihad, there would be people who would get killed, martyred, and the Almighty urged believers to get married to their widows of those who were killed in the way of Allah. And the mention of nikah was followed by the mention of talaq, which is quite understandable that some marriages end up in talaq. And then the longish description of the law of talaq is followed by the law for the widows. Somewhere the mention of prayer was emphasized because it is either taqwa through fasting or remembering the Almighty through prayers that we are able to follow His law and take it seriously. And then the mention of jihad returned, because that's what the style of the Quranic presentation is. In the beginning, there's a theme that is introduced, but there are then relevant themes that are touched upon, and then the description goes back to where it started from. So that's what we did. And finally, what we found was that after the description of jihad, there was this clarification as to why some people believe, others don't believe. The Almighty described His law of guidance, which was followed by 3 examples of One example mentioning how people get misguided, and the other two describing how God enables some people to be guided and to move in the direction of more and more guidance and enlightenment. Um, Now we find that we'll see that there is this mention of uh, infaq, spending in the way of Allah. As I said, this topic was mentioned alongside the discussion on jihad. In the case of jihad, at the time when it was required of Muslims, it was important that along with people getting physically involved in jihad, they should also spend in the way of Allah. So, spending in the way of God is what is emphasized. But this time round, this mention of infaq or spending in the way of God, which begins from verse 261 and goes up to verse 277, there is a very effective description of jihad, of infaq. What are the merits of infaq? What should be done to make sure that this infaq remains sincere and effective? Who are the people who are deserving to benefit from spending in the way of God, etc. So the Almighty says, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. The example of those who spend their wealth in the way of God. كَمَثَلِ حَبَّةٍ أَنْبَتَتْ سَبْعَ سَنَابِلَ. Their example is the example of somebody who spends, and it's like there is one seed and a seed of grain which grows 7 spikes. Each spike has 100 grains, 100 seeds. So in other words, 1 penny spent can multiply into 700. So that's the kind of acceptance that the Almighty shows to those people who spend in His way in the right manner, with the right intentions. And God says, وَاللَّهُ يُضَاعِفُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. God multiplies for whom He wills. He knows the people who are spending in His way sincerely, and He therefore accepts their spending, their sincerity. Wallahu wasi'un alim. And God has all the resources, and He's knowledgeable. That is, He's resourceful, and there's no dearth of resources with Him. He can compensate people as many times the original value of their deeds as He wants, because there's no dearth of rewards in His system. And He's knowledgeable. That is, He knows who is the one who deserves to be rewarded more, and He knows who are the ones who are to be rewarded less because of them not being quite as devoted, as inclined to do things in the best possible manner. But what the next verse tells us is that when we are spending in the way of God, our wealth, or for that matter, we are doing some other good deed, we should be careful. Not all good deeds get accepted. There are challenges, there are threats, which every good believer should be aware of. So the next verse, 262, says, الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ. Those who spend their wealth fi sabilillah, in the way of God, ثُمَّ لَا يُتْبِعُونَ مَا أَنفَقُوا, then they do not follow what they spent, mannam wala azan, with reminders of favors, wa azan, and insult, injury to the people whom they favor, whom they help. That is, the spending in the way of God, which doesn't have these ailments, these problems, evils. They are the ones, lahum ajruhum inda rabbihim, who will have reward with their Lord. They are going to be rewarded. Wala khawfun alayhim wala hum yahzanun. They will have no fear of the future, nor will they have any sorrows and griefs of the past. This is the description of the paradise. This life of ours is afflicted with either the fears of the future, apprehensions, nervousness, what's going to happen, or we have fear, we have griefs, sorrows of what has already gone by. People have left us, we did things wrong, and so on. In the paradise, both these problems are going to be sorted out. There's going to be no fear of the future. It's going to be success, eternal success, and there is going to be no regrets of the past. But the verse more importantly clarifies that this reward is going to be given to the people who spend in God's way on the poor people, the needy people, without causing them any harm, without making them realize that they are favoring them, mannan, and without causing them harm by insulting them, by telling them that they're not behaving well, undermining their status, etc. If that's going to be done, then all spending in the way of God is going to go waste. It's going to be destroyed. Thereafter, after this description of infaq, there is another passage from verse 275 to 281, which is the description of riba, which is interest, which is the very opposite of infaq, spending in the way of God. You see why spending one's wealth in the way of God has the spirit of sacrifice, spirit of sympathy and concern for others that prompts an individual to spend his wealth in the way of God. In the case of riba, a person exploits the difficult situation, plight of those who are in trouble. Instead of giving one's wealth to others, something that one is not in as desperate need as those poor people are. If there is somebody out there who is so obsessed with the love of his wealth that he doesn't want to part with his wealth unless and until he's promised that the wealth he is giving to others temporarily is going to pay dividends, pay rewards in the form of interest. So that is the very opposite, and it's condemned by the Almighty. And this condemnation is from verse 275 to 281. This is the style of the Quranic presentation. That is, two different phenomena, two different approaches, two different results, the very opposites of each other, are described side by side, one after the other. So that as a consequence of the simultaneous contrast, the reader is made aware of the significance of one from the other. At times, both are attempted to be made prominent. The day is described and the night is described. The attributes of good people is followed by a description of the attributes of evil people. The description of the paradise is followed by the description of the hell. And likewise, here we find that the description of uh, the beautiful um, action of a believer, of spending in the way of God, is immediately followed by the ugly attitude of the people who are interested in earning as a consequence of uh, helping out, apparently, by loaning their wealth to poor people, to deserving people for rewards. In this description, uh, it starts from verse 275 and it says that Allazina ya'kuluna riba, those who uh, take riba, interest, la yaqumun, they're not going to stand on the day of judgment. Illa kama yaqumu allazi yatakhabbatuhu ash-shaytanu min al-mas, except the way somebody stands who is being influenced by Satan by touching the person. Some people go insane. Um, they start behaving in a weird manner because of the influence of the jinns. It's the same way that those people who take riba, interest, they are going to behave on the day of judgment. This is going to happen because they say that, after all, interest is also like any other way of making profits. So, this wrong approach, attitude of such people is going to lead them to the kind of punishment they would receive on the day of judgment. I know it's a topic subject which deserves to be described in detail, and I've tried to describe it elsewhere in details, and I'm always available to talk more about it. But right now, I just want to mention the fact that in the law of the Almighty, uh, when you are doing something wrong and the evilness of the wrong attitude or the wrong act is not clear, it is the task of the Sharia, the law of the Almighty, to clarify that it indeed is wrong. So, what is obviously wrong? Theft, cheating, committing frauds, depriving others of their rights uh, by force, etc. There's a long list of things that are unacceptable or immoral. They do not find a place in the description of Sharia because they are already known to humans. So humans are only reminded about them. They belong to the category of hikmah. Sharia plays a role only in matters where humans tend to get confused, like in the case of the prohibition of riba, interest. It has been declared wrong, unacceptable, because in the case of riba, um, you are asking somebody to make a payment, even though he is not in a position to do so. You're actually, uh, you know that the person is either poor or is incurring losses, but you've got no problems in demanding your principal amount to be paid back as well as interest. The Quran goes on to mention about these people in verse 275, 279. It says, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا, if you're not going to stop dealing in interest فَأَذَنُوا, then be prepared. بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, for a war against God and His Messenger. Be informed, we are declaring a war against you. What it means is that at the time when riba was prohibited, uh, people were informed that now that the prohibition has become clear, you are not going to be allowed to deal in it anymore. If you will do it, our soldiers, our system is going to come and forcibly take this business, um, the activity that you're undertaking away from you. Your entire system is going to be taken away. You will not be allowed to do it. So that's what it means. Thereafter, we move on to verse 282, which is the longest verse of the Quran, wherein the Almighty is describing that if you enter into an arrangement of loan, you must bring it into writing. It has to be done in a document. There has to be an evidence, documentary evidence, so that in later times, if there is a dispute about it, that document should settle the dispute. Doesn't matter whether the loan is big or small. If it's a loan, it has to be put into writing. And there are witnesses who should be arranged to be available for getting the formalities done. The next verse mentions that if there is a need for a loan, uh, while there are people on a journey, they're traveling, then because it's not sometimes possible to get the formal document written down, there could be a security collateral that can be demanded from the borrower, and the loan is thus going to be formally, done. It would be given. This is because of the circumstances wherein formal documentation is not possible. However, when they get back to their town, their city, where those formalities are possible, then the person who lent the amount, the lender, should give back the security to the borrower. And the Quran also mentions that if there are people who have been witnesses and they hide the witness that was their responsibility, then it would be athimun qalbuhu. By doing so, they will make their hearts sinners. Their heart is going to be sinful. What it means is that ordinarily, if somebody does something wrong, um, it's possible, very likely, that the wrong is going to be removed by the good deeds of the individual, by him repenting to the Almighty. But if somebody does something wrong knowingly, by planning it, then it influences and affects the heart of the individual. The heart becomes sinful. And it's not easy to then get rid of that evil from the inner feelings and the soul of the individual. So it really is a serious matter that you do something wrong, knowingly wrong, and then you do not make any arrangements to get rid of it. So hiding a witness, hiding a proof, an evidence that you have with you is a serious matter. Then the surah moves on to its end. And at the end of the surah, we have this prayer which the Almighty has proposed to the believers. And obviously, when He proposes believers to make a prayer, what it means is that He wants them to pray, but He has already decided that He's going to accept the prayer that He has suggested. So, like in the case of Surah Al-Fatiha, where it's basically a prayer suggested by the Almighty for guidance. Likewise, here, it begins by saying, Rabbana la tuakhizna in nasina wa akhtana. Oh God, do not blame us. La tuakhizna. Do not hold us accountable. In nasina wa akhtana. If we forget or we commit some error. We are humans. We do things sometimes wrong simply because we forget the fact that it's not supposed to be done, that God is there. And we do things which are wrong. We don't do them by planning for them, but they happen. So we seek the Almighty's forgiveness. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إسرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. So our Lord, do not put burden on us the same way as it was put on those who came before us. The people of the book, the children of Israel, because of their wrong attitude, they were burdened with the expectations of Sharia, which were much more stringent. They were more strict than the Almighty would ordinarily give to His people. This was because of the punishment that they were put, imposed on them because of their wrong attitude. God has promised that His religion is easy to follow. He wants ease for us. He doesn't want difficulty for us. Yuridullahu bikumul yusr, wala yuridu bikumul usr. He wants ease for you. He doesn't want difficulty for you. It's another matter that, unfortunately, we Muslims, we also have made our religion difficult by adding to the list of Sharia expectations which were never mentioned in the Sharia. The opinions of scholars and the detailed understandings that are a part of fiqh, that's what really has caused the religious practice to become difficult, even though the Almighty had removed all the burdens from the Sharia that He had given us. رَبَّنَا وَلَا تُحَمِّلْنَا مَا لَا طَاقَةَ لَنَا بِهِ. Oh our Lord, don't put any burden on us that we cannot bear, we cannot be able to hold. Wa'fu anna, and please ignore our errors, our blemishes. Waghfir lana, and forgive us. Warhamna, and have mercy on us. Anta Mawlana, you are our protector. Fansurna ala al-qawm al-kafirin. So you support and help us against the disbelieving people. This last part of this prayer is actually again an indication of something that I mentioned in my probably first presentation, wherein I clarified that the Quran, the entire Quran, is actually the description of the saga of the messenger's mission of warning his nation. So that mission went through various different phases. And there was a group amongst the non-Muslims, whoever refused to believe, who became kafirs. They deliberately, knowingly rejected the message and became the enemies of the messenger and his companions. So there was uh, an inevitable tussle between the two groups, uh, which was bound to culminate in the form of the destruction of annihilation of the disbelievers. This would always happen whenever there would come a messenger and deliver his message to his nation, because the message was delivered so very clearly that there remained no doubt in the minds of the people who were the addressees. So, in the case of messengers and messengers alone, that we see this phenomenon that there are people who are good, morally upright, who are who become the companions of the messenger, like a magnet attracts all iron towards it. They get attracted towards the messenger. And all those people who were evil, evil natured, immoral, they would be repelled. So they became kafirs. And there was this enmity, which ultimately culminated in them getting destroyed, punished by the Almighty. This is the climax, the end of the story of all messengers. The reason I'm mentioning it is that the non Muslims of today are not necessarily kafir. Some of them could be. But in order for an individual or a group of people to be categorized as kafirs, they need to be informed first properly. If they're not informed properly, what is their fault? So, when a message is presented by the messenger of the Almighty, it's the best possible presentation you can imagine. And when, as a consequence of this presentation, there are people who turn enemies, they are the ones who are kafirs, and they deserve to be punished. So this prayer, the people still pray with the same spirit that we would, annihilate and destroy the kafirs, and by kafirs they mean non-Muslims. That's not necessarily true. Most certainly, those people who are different from us in their faith are causing harm to us. We are going to protect ourselves against them, and we will do whatever we can to make sure that we are behaving in a way that we are not allowed to be harmed. But that doesn't really mean that everybody is evil. And therefore, uh, we should do as best as we can to behave in the right, morally uh, proper manner and present the message of the Almighty to others. Surah Al-Baqarah is followed by Surah Aal-i-Imraan. The two surahs form a pair. One of the indications is the fact that they both begin with Alif Lam Mim. And the Quran, after mentioning uh, a few introductory points, clarifies a very important uh, principle that the Almighty has followed in describing His guidance in the Quran. Before that is mentioned in verse 7, the Almighty is clarified in verse um, 4 that before the Quran was revealed, there was uh, there were these books of Torah and Injil, which were God's books of guidance. Verse 3 says that. And then verse 4 says, and thereafter the Quran was revealed, which is now the book of guidance, and it's Al Furqan, it's the criterion. It distinguishes right from wrong most clearly. After the revelation of the Quran, it is the Quran that is to dominate. That's the decision of the Almighty. It has to hold supreme when it comes to matters relating to religion. In verse 7, God is clarifying that the verses of the Quran fall into two categories. A major part of the Quran is described in verses that are muhkamat. They are clear in what they're saying. and they are clear in what they mean. And all humans who want to understand the Quran, they can understand the meanings and the connotations, what they are actually clarifying without any doubt, any problems. However, there are some verses in the Quran that are mutashabihat, metaphorical. Their meanings are absolutely clear. The entire Quran is a clear book. There is no description in the Quran which is ambiguous, confusing. It's only it's only because sometimes we are not able to either have the right knowledge about language or the context in which the verses were revealed from within the text, or we are not focusing or concentrating properly that we don't understand some verses. And obviously, the idea is that we should continue to strive and struggle to know the truth, to know what is the right understanding. However, some verses are metaphorical, the ones that are talking about the world that we cannot see. No human has seen that world. And therefore, there are no words in our vocabulary to describe them. And therefore, it was needed to have words similar to what the reality was that should be borrowed and those realities be described metaphorically. There was no other way of doing it. Something which you and I have not seen, and there are no words in our language to describe them. What else can we do except for the fact that we talk about something similar, near to that phenomenon, to that reality? And that is what the Almighty did in choosing metaphorical verses, mutashabihat, to describe them. So, for example, the throne of the Almighty, his chair, the angels, their wings, the fact that uh, God breathed his breath into Adam, the description of the paradise, the rivers, the description of the hell, the fire, they're all allegorical, metaphorical, mutashabihat. Uh, their reality, nobody can know except God because nobody has seen them. But they were needed to be described. And therefore, the manner that this description was done was through metaphorical verses. Towards the end of this verse, this is verse number 7. In verse 8, there is this prayer which says, Rabbana la tuzigh qulubana. Oh our Lord, don't allow our hearts to get twisted. Mada is hadaytana. After you have guided us. Wahab lana min ladunka rahma. And grant us mercy from yourself. Innaka antal wahhab. You indeed are the one who gives to people, to others, without any limits. The Quran warns that those descriptions that are mutashabihat should be understood only to the extent that the Quranic description is mentioning. We should not try to know their reality. Those people who are making an attempt to know the reality of those descriptions, they're causing mischief, and they would end up in difficulty, in trouble. They'll get misled. So there is no point in trying to understand the details of what those rivers are going to be like, or as, for instance, some people are fond of talking about the women who have been described. We have no business whatsoever except to understand what has been mentioned, apparently mentioned in the Quran, and leave it to the Almighty to let us witness them as and when the occasion would come and see what they actually really meant. Like in the case of Surah Al-Baqarah, In the case of Surah Aal-i-Imraan 2, we will find that there is a mention, a part of the surah that addresses and invites the people of the book. In the first half, after a few introductory verses. And then in the second half, the Almighty uh, addresses the Muslims, the believers. But before that, there is a prayer, a dua, which is mentioned in verses 26 and 27. And this prayer is actually worded in a way that the Almighty's decision has as if been captured in the prayer. You see, the Almighty, when he decides to give people something that he has decided for them, as I said, describing the end part of Surah Al-Baqarah, what he does is that he asks, enables the people, believers, to pray to him. And obviously, if the wordings of the prayer are suggested by the Almighty himself, then what it means is that this prayer is most certainly going to be heard and implemented. So the transfer of status from children of Israel to the children of Ishmael was done. The status of them being the representatives of the Almighty. So this transfer did take place. However, before it happened, there were obviously certain steps that were taken. It happened gradually. And why it was happening, the Almighty required believers to pray. Qulillahumma, say, O Allah, O God, Malik al-Mulk, the owner of sovereignty, the king of the sovereign of the entire existence. Tu'til mulka man tasha. You give kingship, sovereignty to whomsoever you like, whom you will. وَتَنْزِلُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ. And you take away the reign of administration, of kingship from whoever you want to deprive, you do it. وَتُعِزُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ. And you give honor, respect to whom you will. وَتُذِلُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ. And you give disrespect, you humble whom you will. بِيَدِكَ الْخَيْرِ. In your hands is all goodness. You are the decision maker. You decide, and things fall into place according to what your decision is. إِنَّكَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Indeed, you have control over everything. You are running the affairs of this world. So whether it is humans or whether it is the nature, the phenomena of the nature, you decide. You call the shots and things happen. تُولِجُ اللَّيْلَ فِي النَّهَارِ. You cause the night to enter the day. وَتُولِجُ النَّهَارَ فِي اللَّيْلِ. And you cause the day to enter the night. Like it's happening there in the nature, likewise it's happening in the lives of humans, individual as well as collective. وَتُخْرِجُ الْحَيَّ مِنَ الْمَيِّتِ وَتُخْرِجُ الْمَيِّتَ مِنَ الْحَيِّ. You bring the living out of the dead, and you bring the dead out of the living. وَتَرْزُقُ مَنْ تَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. And you give provision to whom you will without any limits. After this prayer, the Almighty now moves on to address the children of Israel, in particular the Christians, the Nasara. In Surah Al-Baqarah, the first half was addressing and inviting the people of the book, but in particular the Jews. In the first part of Surah Al-Imraan, the partner surah of Surah Al-Baqarah, it is again the people of the book who are invited to have faith in the Quran and the Prophet. But this time round, the emphasis is more on the Nasara, the Christians. So at the beginning of this description, in verses 33 and 34, the Almighty is talking about his basic plan for guidance that he set forth for the humanity. He says, verse 33, Inna Allah astafa Adam. God chose Adam, wa Nuhan and Noah, wa Aal-i-Imraan, and the progeny of Abraham, wa Aal-i-Imraan, and the progeny of Imran, al-Alamin, or the entire mankind. That is, to begin with, in order to guide humankind, he chose individual prophets, Adam, Noah, and many others. But when it reached Ibrahim alayhi salam, instead of choosing an individual prophet for the purpose of letting people know the truth of God's message, he chose a family, the family of Abraham. The family of Abraham then had two branches. It branched off into two parts, the children of Israel, the children of Ishmael. The children of Israel were the children of Ishaq, Isaac, and Yaqub, Jacob. So they were the ones who got the first chance to be God's representatives for something like 2,000 years. They had many prophets who appeared in their history. And then thereafter, it was amongst the children of Ishmael that the Almighty sent the last prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is how the Quran begins the description, wherein the people of the book, particularly the Christians, are invited to have faith in the last message by being presented the scheme of the Almighty, the way he followed it. And so they understand it, and they are able to then realize that according to this scheme, this message is now, it ought to be accepted. It mentions after the progeny of Abraham, the progeny of Imran. Imran was the father of Maryam alayhi salam, and the maternal grandfather of Jesus Christ. Because their story was to be described, therefore, from amongst the children of Abraham, the children of Imran were also mentioned to make them prominent and as a consequence, pave the way for the description of their story, of their details to be put across. This mention talks about first the birth of Mary, the decision of her mother to devote her for the task of serving the house of God. It talks about Zachariah, the prophet who was the uncle of Mary. He was the husband of her aunt. It talks about the birth of John the Baptist, Yahya alayhi salam, and then the miraculous birth of Jesus Christ. All this was done in order for the Christians to realize that whatever happened according to the scheme of the Almighty. If there were certain things that happened miraculously, they were remarkable, that too was God's design. So don't be surprised, and now understand through the last message of God what his overall scheme was, so that you are able to have the life of Jesus Christ in its proper perspective. Uh, this description of Jesus Christ um, starts from verse 35 and goes on until verse 64. Obviously, when I'm saying is his description, his story, I'm talking about the story of Mary as well. So where it starts from there and reaches the point where he was born miraculously, and then his mission is also mentioned briefly. But in the middle of the description of this story, there is this verse 44, when the Almighty says, ذَلِكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الْغَيْبِ. These are the news of the unseen. نُوحِيهِ إِلَيْكَ. We reveal to you this story, this description, O Prophet. We are revealing to you. وَمَا كُنْتَ لَدَيْهِمْ إِذْ يُلْقُونَ أَقْلَامَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ يَكْفُلُ مَرْيَمَ. And you were not with them when they were casting their pens to decide who is going to be responsible for upbringing Mary. وَمَا كُنْتَ لَدَيْهِمْ إِذْ يَخْتَصِمُونَ. Nor were you there when they were disputing this matter. That is, you have come up with this description clearly and beautifully. How? Nobody knew about these details. Neither you nor the people of the book. Although this story is mentioned in the Bible, yet some part of it, which has been clearly mentioned in the Quran, is found nowhere. And the way it has been described, it appears that it makes a lot of sense. So, in other words, the Almighty is pointing out that this description could not have been possible had the Quran not been God's word and had not his prophet been his representative. Then the Quran mentions that when inviting the people of the book to have faith, the discussion should start from points of commonalities. That is, we should not start talking about differences so as to erect barriers between us and them. The Quran says, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ. Say, O people of the book, تَعَالَوْا إِلَىٰ كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ. Come forth. Let's talk about those matters which are common between you and us. So that's the wisdom of preaching. If we were to talk to the people of the book, we ought to talk about the points of commonality so that there is a confidence that's built up. And then we can find opportunities, occasions to talk about the differences as well. But it wasn't an easy task. The people of the book, not all of them were good. There were people who were evil, who used to conspire. So the Quran talks about one group amongst them and mentions the way they used to conspire. It says, وَقَالَتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. And a group amongst the people of the book said, آمِنُوا بِالَّذِي أُنزِلَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. This is verse 72. They said to each other, believe in what has been revealed to these people in one part of the day, in the morning, the first part. وَكْفُرُوا آخِرَهُ. And disbelief. Change your opinion in the other part. Why? لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. So that they should also return. They should lose confidence in their faith when they would know that there were people from amongst the people of the book who believed first, imagining that it's the same book, the same prophet who had been prophesied in their books, and then they've turned their backs immediately after getting into the fold of Islam. There must be something wrong. So that was the kind of conspiracy they hatched. in order to cause the believers to be confused. The Quran goes on to talk about the fact that, you know, when you want to come close to God and you want to be really pious and have God's support for you, uh, you want to show your loyalty to Him, you have got to make sacrifices. Uh, unless you are prepared to sacrifice things that you like the most, you will not be able to attain the status wherein you're close to Him. So the Quran says in verse 92, "Lan tanalul birra hatta tunfiqu mimma tuhibbun." You cannot reach the level of piety, al-birr. You cannot get the trust of the Almighty until such time that you spend from the wealth that you like, you love. That's when when you do it, you'll be eligible to the Almighty's His love for you, and He's going to trust you. This description of addressing the children of Israel, the people of the book, in particular the Christians, it ends at verse number 100, 101. And thereafter, there is address to the Muslims that begins. But I'll just talk about one verse, which is verse 103, that invites Muslims to be united by holding fast to the Quran. It says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. Hold fast to the rope of God, all of you together. That is, understand this book, follow it properly, sort out your disputes in the light of the book, believe in it more than anything else, have confidence in it, and be united. If you're going to listen to and take seriously more than the Quran other sources, then you are bound to be divided into factions. So hold fast to this book, this rope of God, and be united. That's where I would stop today, and we'll continue, inshallah, tomorrow by discuss the later second half of Surah Aal-i-Imraan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.